Hello everyone, I am Grainwolf and welcome back to another video. For this one I thought I'd focus on an era in our ancient story which began the march of technological progression, which has culminated with us today. The Bronze Age began at different stages between the approximate years of 3300 BC in relation to the Middle East, to 2000 BC in places such as China. In Europe, this period began roughly sometime between 3200 BC in the south and 2200 BC in the north. For this video I'll be focusing on the European Bronze Age, as those are the sites and objects I've had the opportunity to visit. Alongside the obvious introduction of metalworking, the Bronze Age also brought about changes to how individual societies worked, and by extension, likely how individual people saw themselves in relation to the world around them. Social hierarchies seem to have become much more apparent. Warrior elites and specialised craftspeople, for example, are identifiable in the burials of the time. On that note, burials also suggest a shift in how people perceived individuality, with many cultures adopting single graves, often buried under large mounds. These burials usually have paraphernalia of life included within them, such as tools of the trade for the occupant, weapons perhaps to be used in the afterlife, and pottery vessels which once contained libations for the deceased. Although the concept of metalworking, as we would use the term today, was very new at this point in history, artisans quickly became masters of the craft. Goldwork from the early Bronze Age in Britain alone displays a society which already had acquired a vast knowledge of how the metal could be worked and used. So, with no further delay, here are 5 Bronze Age artefacts which I find fascinating. On the 28th of September 1992, during construction works on the A20 road in southeast England, the remains of a Bronze Age boat were discovered. Archaeologists from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust began excavating the find, which laid about 7 metres below the ground. Despite facing challenges caused by previous construction works in the area, an impressive 9.5 metres of the boat were able to be recovered, leaving up to another 9.5 metres in situ. The boat is in a remarkable state of preservation, thanks to the anaerobic nature of the soil it had been sat in since the Middle Bronze Age, with carbon dating giving it an approximate date of 1575 to 1520 BC. Examination of the boat revealed where marks on the underside of the hull, which would be consistent with a vessel which had been dragged over beach pebbles repeatedly. It had also been repaired a number of times over the course of its use. The boat seems to have been deliberately dragged up onto the shore of a river and abandoned there in ancient times, rather than being a shipwreck or sunken boat. The Dover Bronze Age boat was made using large oak planks hewn from old trees, which formed the flat bed and sides of the boat. These planks were quite literally sewn together, rather than using any kind of nail or screw. To do this, the builders took and formed twisted rope from a yew tree's branches and tied them through holes in the oak planks. Seams were made watertight with pads of moss held under oak laths, and beeswax and animal fat pressed into stitch holes. This sewn plank technique is characteristic of Bronze Age Northwest European boats. While there wasn't much found alongside the boat to tell us what it had been used specifically for, experiments in recasting the boat reveal it would have been able to make short sea voyages, such as the crossing from England's coast to that of mainland France or Netherlands. As you'll see with this list, I find the wooden artefacts from the Bronze Age to be some of the most fantastic discoveries, which leads us to the next find. Next up is a site I was lucky enough to visit earlier this year in Hallstatt, Austria. Hallstatt was a place of great significance to late Bronze Age and early Iron Age Europe. This was due to the salt deposits which sit below the mountains in the region, which is sometimes referred to as white gold, thanks to its value. To extract the rock salt, ancient miners had begun carving out mine tunnels through the top of mountains down into the salt within. It's within one of those mines that modern miners uncovered a near perfectly preserved staircase dated to 1344 BC. The combination of the salt itself and salt water made an environment within these ancient mines that has preserved many items from prehistory which we would have otherwise never seen. Within the context of the Hallstatt mine and the staircase, items such as hats, rucksacks and even textiles have been discovered, which as far as artefacts go, give us a rather rare and tangible connection to the Bronze Age miners who once wore and carried them. In the year 1833, quarrying works in Flintshire, Wales, uncovered something quite spectacular. A burial mound was opened, and within lay a stone-lined grave. When opened, the finders were confronted with the remains of a skeleton, which had a myriad of gold fragments surrounding its shoulders. Since then, restoration works have carefully put the cape back together, revealing an impressive and detailed object, which seems to have no practical use, and dates to sometime between 1900 to 1600 BC. The craftsmanship behind the cape is quite remarkable, especially considering that the entire object had been beaten from one gold ingot. The cape was then decorated with ribs and round bosses for decoration. The neck and bottom of the cape show perforations, which might suggest that it was once attached to something else, perhaps organic, which hasn't survived the span of time to our day. If you've ever made the journey to Stonehenge, or Wiltshire in general, you might have heard of the Bush Barrow Chieftain. Named due to the bush which still sits atop the barrow in the Normanton Down Bronze Age Cemetery, which in turn is just the other side of the road from Stonehenge itself, the Bush Barrow Chieftain was a man who lived nearly 4,000 years ago. His burial, even by today's standards, was one of extreme wealth. On his body he wore a gold lozenge, beaten to a single millimetre in thickness, and decorated with geometric shapes. The angles of the geometry on this lozenge are sometimes said to be representing the angle of the sunrise on the solstice at Stonehenge itself. He had a large gold belt buckle, a smaller gold lozenge, and multiple daggers, one of which had a handle which was decorated with 140,000 1mm thick gold studs. He also had a mace which had bone zigzags inserted into the handle, an object often associated with authority in early Bronze Age societies. We'll never know exactly who this man was, or what he did to deserve such an astoundingly rich grave, but we do know he was someone who was very important to the people who buried him. Lastly for this video is the Bronze Age causeway known as Flag Fen. Discovered in the 1980s and excavated by the renowned archaeologist Francis Pryor, Flag Fen sits in what was once a marshy landscape, or fen, near Peterborough. Excavations revealed a huge causeway made of timber, which crossed the semi-wetlands of the fen to a dry island. This allowed people to cross the wetland even during periods of flooding. The causeway was made of several rows of wooden posts attached together by boards which created the timber walkway. Early phases of construction used alder and willow, and later phases used oak. Carpentry marks left on the wood indicate use of bronze tools to process the timber. Attached to the walkway was a platform, which may have played a part in the site's use. It suggested that, although it likely served as a simple passage between two dry spaces, Flag Fen had a ritual component to it. Large quantities of deposited items have been found beside the posts and walkway, which range from extremely valuable items such as swords, to smaller everyday things such as pins. The causeway is quite monumental in scale, measuring just around 1 kilometre, and was made from 60,000 upright timbers and 250,000 horizontal planks. The site is now open to visitors and has a great display of what was discovered there in their museum. I hope you've enjoyed this video. These are only 5 of the amazing archaeological discoveries of the Bronze Age that I've had the fortune to visit in my travels. If you like this format, please let me know in the comments below so I know to make more like this. If you want more ancient history, check out my links in the description. I've been Grey and Wolf, and thank you for watching.